Hey everybody, how's it going? Welcome to the Obsidian Twitch channel. My name is Aarik Dorobiala. I'm the community manager here at Obsidian. I'm sitting with Josh. We're doing part 2 of our Pillars of Eternity Director's Commentary stream. But before we get into it, you guys might notice some cool little subscribe button down on the Twitch channel. And so all your subscriptions go directly to, we are participating in Extra Life. It is a great charity that helps Orange County, Children's Hospital Orange County, which we are helping to raise money for, which we are still doing so until the end of the year. All subscription monies go directly to Extra Life and to the Chalk Hospital. We don't keep any of the money, so if you guys could please donate, that would be super awesome, and it helps out all the children. And so you also, you get these cool emoticons. You can see my little face there next to Mikey 2x4's post and the Obsidian O. So yeah, please, guys, it's for a great cause. So we're just going to go ahead and get into it. We're going to start off in Defiance Bay. So guys, Josh is just going to talk as we play through the game. If you guys have questions, please go ahead and chat away, and we'll do our best to answer all your questions.
Yeah.
All right, so last time I got destroyed at the keep. So I did a little leveling and got some gear before we went into to Act 2 here.
You said you fought in the Saints' War, but for which side?
The one that blew up my god.
I didn't mean anything by it. I imagine a man with a head made of fire and light would be very convincing.
Funny thing about Dear Woodens. With all that fire and light, they just treated him like another authority figure.
I can't remember what your are you a barbarian?
I'm a chanter, tank chanter.
Chanter, that's right,
Yeah.
that's right, tank chanter.
So,
Copper Lane was one of the first actually it was the first district for Defiance Bay that we built. We actually had to redesign it much later. The layout changed actually quite a bit. It was our first attempt at doing a full city district like this. We had already done Deerford, but Deerford wasn't quite as enclosed in the same way. So there wound up having to be a lot of redesign and relayout, and we learned a lot of things about how to not do this that we applied to both Twin Elms and also to Stalwart in the White March. Oh, this dude.
good old Dalton.
Dalton, my love. What's the name of this quest again? Isn't it something my love? We'll find out.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Why is Pallegina the best party member? It's an interesting question because
Voice of the past.
Voices of the past, okay. Initially, people did not like Pallegina. Initially, at least based on forum feedback, it appeared that people didn't like Pallegina, or at least she was not among the favorite party members. Part of that could be attributed to her being late and hard to find relative to other companions. Also, initially, she did not have any unique... so basically as a paladin, she didn't have any order-specific talents or anything like that. And I think it was patch 3.0 when we added Pallegina's her Brotherhood of the Five Sons abilities, and those are really good, especially Wrath of the Five Sons is really powerful. So I think a lot of people suddenly were like, oh wait, this is really good. Also, I think Paladins in general got stronger as we patched the game. So I think that also has contributed to people liking her more over time, at least mechanically.
Which I'm trying to get right now, because she's too awesome.
You got to do that whole quest though.
I know.
Yeah, that's the other thing, is that most of the actually I don't think any of the companions require you to do a quest before getting them except Pallegina, so.
Yeah, she's the only one. Why is that?
I don't know. I thought we were going to wind up doing a little bit more of that, but as time went on, I think we realized it was more difficult to integrate them into other quests. It was kind of difficult to even incorporate her into this quest. It complicated things quite a bit. So I think that that's why. Whoa.
Nice and foggy.
The fog rolled in. By the way, so it's funny. Some folks, I just saw someone on I don't know if it was Reddit or somewhere else, where they didn't know how to complete a quest in this area. Actually, can you go to the area map?
Yeah.
So if you see all that water, there are a lot of people that play the game that don't realize that the tides actually in this area, they make the water level go up and down. And when the water level goes down, you can actually walk around down there. But yeah, so there are some players that never really realized that. Yeah, there are certain quests you can only really do when the water level does go down.
Yeah, you can see water covering these buildings that are submerged right now. And the stairs itself right here, there's water halfway. So yeah, daytime, you could go in there. I forgot where this store is. Here it is. How do you feel about people finishing games before those patches?
How do I feel about people finishing the game before those patches? I mean, good, fine, I guess. I mean, we always want the game to be as solid as it can be, and prior to, you know, prior to launch. But because there are so many different ways that you can play this game, and there are so many different parties, it's kind of inevitable. But you know, there are certain things that we find like, oh wow, that, you know, that combination of abilities really turned out to be not so good, or certain companions have an appeal or lack of appeal that we didn't really think of in the first place.
Good day, stranger.
Get a cool pet.
Legendary acquired the film and TV rights to Dune. Ever think of doing
Yes.
Dune stuff? Yeah, we have a lot of Dune fans here. I don't know if we've ever talked to anyone about making a Dune game, but it is certainly something that a lot of people here really like, the Dune universe. Also, I'm friends with Carla Zamanja at Fulbright, and she actually has a jacket where she had custom patches made that one says Mentat and the other says Gola. It's
Nice.
it's pretty cool. It's I admire her dedication to the Dune universe. The future of the Pillars of Eternity system what is the future of the Pillars of Eternity system? Is it going to be overhauled completely for a sequel, especially given that it might feature higher levels or merely tweaked? Will there be a drastic reduction of active abilities or to compensate or something like that, for instance? There are a lot of things that there are a lot of things that I think could be better about the underlying game system that we used in Pillars of Eternity. For example, I think that there are ways we could do things like multi-classing. I think there are ways that we could make engagement a clearer system to understand. There are better ways for us to do sort of per rest type powers versus per encounter powers. Also, penetration and armor is something that I've talked about in the past. The armor system scales well in some ways, but is not clear in others. So I wouldn't expect, you know, like some massive change for the future. But I do think there are some low-level changes that we could make that would make the game, I think, stronger, give the player more options, but make things clearer. And I think if we can do all that stuff, then that's stuff we should do. You've previously said you want to make a historical RPG. What period, or more specifically, what event would you want to cover? My interests in history usually have to do with Western and Central Europe in about the 15th to 17th centuries. A lot of religious history, also the history of magic and what people understand about magic in those time periods. And also, I have an interest in 19th century America. Those are the two areas that I have the most interest in. And I'm usually less sort of concerned about individual events and more sort of interested in the kind of zeitgeist or you know, the sort of like spirit of that time, how people understood things, how they conceived of spirituality and God and magic and the supernatural and stuff like that. Yeah, that's sort of my interest in those periods. How many people have accomplished the ultimate? So some people are not familiar with the ultimate is, what the ultimate is. The ultimate is an achievement that was added in 3.0.
Yes.
Yeah, patch 3.0, which is one of our later patches. And the ultimate made, it's kind of like a Triple Crown Solo Plus. It requires you to, I'm not gonna hit everything, but it's essentially Triple Crown Solo but you have to complete the base game and White March, kill all the dragons in the game, defeat the archmages,
Yep.
and do all the bounties in the game. And there's a small number of, there's a small handful of people. It seems to be like maybe a dozen or so that have completed the ultimate. I'm not sure. I don't know if we can get exact Steam stats on that, but it's a pretty small number.
Less than 1%, I think.
Yeah, Steam says less than 1%. Like I can't remember what that figure is. It's not very many people. Why did the game not have an option to wait N hours? Strange oversight. The sundial thing in Leia was useful for that. Because most quests in Pillars of Eternity were not time dependent, and I do agree that that's an annoying thing to not have there because there are a few quests that are time dependent. I requested that sundial in Leia specifically because that can be very annoying. So I would say, if we were to do more time-dependent quests or world states in the future, we would have a wait button, so you can wait independently of resting. And I think there are pretty easy ways to do that. I mean, Fallout did that. It's not that hard. So yes, if we were to shift to doing more world state and time-dependent quests, we would use a wait feature so that you could just pass time. Well, yeah, sometimes you do want to explore a new area in daylight. I think that is less annoying, though. I think that is less annoying than I can't do this aspect of a quest when I don't, I can't advance time.
Safe travels.
Boom.
What were the overarching goals for Pillars soundtrack? As the lead, how much influence over that soundtrack did you have? Also, why are there no salads or salets? A lot of the goals were, well, we wanted to evoke, I think I covered this in one of my GDC talks, at least in brief. We were trying to capture some of the feelings from the Michael Hoenig soundtrack for Baldur's Gate, the Inan Zur soundtrack for Baldur's Gate 2, and also he also did Icewind Dale 2, and also Jeremy Soul's soundtrack for Icewind Dale. So there are aspects of those that we were trying to capture. Obviously, they're different composers, but looking at those elements, we wanted to capture that. And then we also looked at some more contemporary fantasy music, like the Howard Shore soundtracks from Lord of the Rings, and I think you can see the influence in a lot of the stuff that Justin Bell did. And I can't remember all the specifics, but at a high level, that is one of the things that we were looking at. I think things for the future that we'd want to look at is we'd want to find ways to have the music be a little more adaptive. There's some cool things that a number of games have done, like The Witcher 3, where you can alter the mood subtly in really neat ways, and it's a little more immersive. I think one of the problems with game soundtracks in general is that the soundtracks are not very responsive to game state, or if they are responsive to game state, it's very abrupt. So I think that Justin Bell and I both think it would be really neat to see how we could, play with that in the future. Have you ever? Oh, and why are there no salads? I think we just, it's like how many helmets are we going to have? And salads weren't one of them. I don't think it was a specific no, don't have salads. Or salets. That's out of the question. So there certainly could be more in the future. Am I going to nerf? Oh, have I ever considered making achievements that can be time or difficulty gating? Example, X achievement can only be done until X time, or can only do X achievement in the first playthrough. I haven't thought about it. I don't think it's a bad idea. But yeah, it hasn't been a thing that we had thought about previously. I'm certainly not opposed to it. I think it's a cool idea. Are you going to nerf the Relentless Storm spell in Pillars 2? It makes druids pretty one-dimensional. I don't know if it makes them one-dimensional, but it is powerful enough that can get you through a lot of stuff. I think if we wind up changing a lot of elements of how armor and penetration work, damage values would probably get retuned anyway. So, yeah, that's Potentially, yeah. But it's not necessarily, singling it out. It's more like we would be likely to retune a lot of that stuff anyway.
Might get a little loud.
I was recently at CD Projekt Red Studio, right? Can I talk about that? Yeah, I mean, I went, we collectively know folks at CD Projekt and CD Projekt Red and GOG, and one of my friends who used to work at Black Isle, Patrick Mills, he was a designer on Story Witcher 3, and so I visited with him. I didn't go to Poland specifically to hang out at CD Projekt or CD Projekt Red, but yeah, I had some time, and so I went over there and hung out with those guys, and they have a really cool studio, and they're really nice.
Let's go.
This troll's a beast.
Will passives and skills that are essentially useless be looked at, changed, removed in the sequel? Many seem like a little more than a waste of a level, while other ones seem to be still overpowered. If there's a design choice behind some of them, I'd love to know what they are. Without knowing about the specifics, I can't really answer that, to be honest. Our desire is always to have all those things be useful, and over time we have tried to improve and increase the usefulness of things as we found them. I mean, that was one of the big reasons behind the skill retune in 3.0. We're not necessarily going to we're never going to get like perfect balance, subjective balance. We're always going to try to make those things more appealing over time. Yes, anything that we find that people don't really use or think is terrible, we're going to try to find ways to make it more appealing. Sometimes that's a matter of retuning it. Sometimes it's a matter of making the usefulness of something more apparent. But yeah, our goal is always to make those things feel valuable and useful to players.
Forgot Kana was my trap guy. I got rid of him.
In my unhumble opinion, one of my least favorite aspects of Pillars of Eternity was itemization and loot. Do you guys have plans to make gearing great again? I think that we addressed some of this. Well, one, we addressed some of it with the existing items in the game with patches, and we also tried to improve that with soulbound items, and I think soulbound items improved things quite a bit. I do think there's another aspect, which is I think enchantment can work a lot differently. I think enchantment can work in such a way where it does feel like you can grow the power of things over time, but not infinitely, and that you can also make unique properties on weapons, definitely, keep that unique feeling on a per weapon basis. So I do think there's room for improvement there, both in the systemic aspect and also in the individual items, like cool soulbound items and cool unique magic items that you find. Wonder why humans were the only ones without unique abilities for their various sub-races. Was this a conscious attempt to avoid the sort of phrenology feel that sometimes crop up in RPGs with multiple versions of human, or is there some other reason? I mean, that was part of it. Also, there's just there were a lot of sub-race abilities, and it seemed less important for the humans, and given that you get into this weird phrenology stuff, yeah, it just seemed like that would be easier to just say, like, humans all get the fighting spirit.
Slowly now.
Will Tyranny's inline text tooltips likely be in a future Pillars title? I will say that I really like that feature a lot, and I believe most of the players I've seen seem to like it a lot. So for games like this, I would want to use it in the future, definitely. I think it really helps with one helps both with general lore stuff, and it also helps remind the player when they made a choice. Maybe if it happened a really long time ago, it reminds them, like, hey, by the way, you did this thing. And you're like, oh, okay, so that's why this person is responding to me in this way. Ideally, that is something that is clear just through the narrative, but we know that these games are long, and a lot of times people will stop playing a game and start playing a game. And so it might be 2 weeks or a month between save and load. So having a little tooltip reminder saying like, remember you did this thing, I think is that's useful. Related to my previous questions about itemization, what about interesting set bonuses and interactions and totally randomized stat allocation? Set bonuses I think can be cool. That is something we've talked about. Randomized stat allocation in items, I don't think that is really necessary for a game like this. And I think that the uniqueness and non-randomness of them is more appealing for this realm of games, like this type of spiritual successor to BG and Icewind Dale, where these have designed sort of abilities and stats. That's how they work. I think that kind of works better for this style of game, personally. What do I think about the way the narrative in the game has been delivered? Would you change, refine, tone down anything in view of a possible sequel? Yeah, I think the pacing of the game initially was pretty slow. I think we were a little too heavy on lore dumping. And I would try to find better ways to introduce that stuff. Pacing, I think, is very important. I think it's something we didn't do quite well enough in the base game. And I also think that we missed opportunities for more extended companion interactions and the player getting involved in between their interactions. I think we could also do a better job of having NPCs react to the reactions of companions. That's something a lot of people had commented on. So if you're talking to someone and then Aloth pipes in and says something, not ignoring that Aloth is there unless he's doing it as an aside or something. So yeah.
Oh, she's trapped.
Oh no. What about pissing off NPCs so much they don't want to be around the PC anymore and permanently leave the party? Was disappointed that, for example, Tyranny chickened out on that. I don't know how true that is about Tyranny. I don't know all the different ways that can happen. People can certainly, in Tyranny, people can certainly leave your party. I mean, people left my party. So, I mean, it was due to sort of story choices, but yeah, people left my party in Tyranny. I think that can work. I think that the player needs to have good forecasting about that. I think the fact that we do allow players to make their own party members can help with that. So if you lose, if Aloth is I can't stand this, I have to leave, the player has options for addressing that. Yeah, so Barrack can leave. I think there are a lot of examples in Tyranny where people can actually leave the party. Will you make changes to attributes in PoE 2? In the future, I don't think that's a system that we have tremendous plans to change dramatically. I think it would depend on any other systemic changes that we made. Yeah, it would depend. I mean, it's not like we looked at it at the end and said oh yeah, this is still really bad or anything like that. If there are other changes in the system, that might require going into the attributes a bit and tuning it. Since Sagani is in the party, how do you feel about the Ranger class, how the Ranger class worked out? It felt really weak to me, even though statistically it was actually fine. I do think that is really the problem. I'm sorry. I do think that's the problem with the Ranger class. I don't know exactly the way to address it, but I do feel that Rangers are pretty good. I think a lot of players realize that playing Rangers does require a bit of coordination with the animal companion, but if you do that, their damage output can be really good, and the animal companions can be very strong. What's your opinion on Rangers?
Yeah, they're pretty strong. If you play them right, it does require, micromanagement to play the Ranger effectively. But I mean, if you play it right, the Ranger's pretty good.
Yeah. So I think I think that's, like trying to communicate the best way to, like what's the best way to communicate that to the player. I think that's something we'll have to think about. I think in general, as you get companions, especially if they're of new classes, kind of letting the player know, hey, this is kind of how this class works, and this is how you're going to get the most out of this class. And these are the places in which the class doesn't work as well. I think that can be very useful for players. Figuring out how to communicate all that in a smooth way, it's a bigger challenge. But my feeling ultimately is that Rangers turned out pretty good. But I don't disagree that they come across as weak to a lot of people.
The Power Ranger party is pretty good. All Moon God likes Rangers.
Yeah, there's the all Moon God like Ranger party is pretty strong.
Thanks for the host, Baffos. What's up, guys? Let's go Copper Lane in.
Would you consider making an RPG where the player can create a canonically transgender character and be acknowledged in some way in game? How would you implement that? Maybe just a simple Me Too dialogue option with a transgender NPC? Sure, I guess it depends on the context. Like what is the setting? What's the game? What's the context of them talking about that? Like sort of conceptions of gender, like even historically, have changed a lot over time. So if we're trying to recreate something historical, that has to be sort of framed in that context and how people understood that. But I mean, I think there's a place for that. It just really depends on what the context is for any of this stuff. Are you going to make guns and reload? Are you going to make guns reload weapons better in the sequel? At the moment, the only circumstances they're really good is quick switching, which I was wondering if this is intended. Since White March 1 and speed stacking got fixed, bows have been the go-to choice for ranged characters. I don't know if that's, I don't really agree that that's always true. I think bows are the most reliable sort of solution for ranged characters. Guns still have a strong place. Yes, quick switching is one of the most efficient ways to get a good use out of guns because you can do a nice sort of alpha strike and then you can roll in with some other weapon or switch to a bow or something. So I don't know if I necessarily agree that bows are like the thing to use. Yeah, I do think though that if we change how armor and penetration work, there might be some more considerations there with guns. So yeah, that I think will depend on some other aspects. But that being said, I still think that guns and crossbows actually have some nice features.
How's the hand?
Turning purple. I have to cut it off.
Okay, big question, Josh. Sawyer versus Hard. Can you scroll back up on there? I missed Infinitrons. Josh Sawyer versus Hard Counters immunities. The lack of those was a controversial thing during the game's development, but then you added up ending them in patches. Tell us the story of that. Was it that the game's numbers ended up being too uncontrollable for a purely soft counter-based approach? No, I don't think it's that it's purely that. So here's the thing. Like, it had been quite a while since a game like this with 6 characters on the PC, D&D-ish in some ways, had been out. I had a concern that if we had a system with encounters that were built very heavily on hard counters, it could be a difficult system for people to learn. To be honest, I still don't believe that we really tutorialized afflictions and counters particularly well, but that was my concern. The reason I felt okay with introducing them later was because the game was already out. We already saw how people interacted with the game. And even though we still didn't have really time to tutorialize them well, I felt it was safer to add them in progressively. So we added in damage immunities progressively. We added in affliction immunities progressively. And now I think they're at a place where they work pretty well in the game. I do think they could work better in the game, but more importantly, I think we can tutorialize them better. So I would say that, they can still work in a future sequel and stuff like that. It was mostly, I was erring on the side of caution to not wind up making a game where the lack of feedback and the lack of, we also didn't have feedback for immunities early on. The lack of feedback for it and the lack of tutorialization would overwhelm players. So I think we can deal with that now, though. Question, more of a curiosity to say the truth. Who did the idea of Isilmir being a woman come from? Because Aloth nesting a lady's personality inside of him is one of the things which made this character so fascinating to me, in tandem with the way his motives, personality, and narrative have been conveyed, of course. It was my idea. So other than Durance and Grieving Mother, I did the initial design, not the writing, but the initial design of the companions. And yeah, so Aloth having a spirit inside of him that was a woman, that was his awakened personality. That was my idea. And so the idea with her is that she is like a more rural Adiran, and so that's why she speaks in Heel Speak, which is the dialect used by kind of the rural folk in Edir and also in the Deerwood, although you don't see very many of them. So that's why she has that, not necessarily the personality she has, but that's why she has the dialect that she has.
Hey, Allah, can I, your friend? What's easy about
General feeling on recovery. In Tyranny, it's a mechanic that only seems like a punishment for heavy armor. More importantly, good players know how to build to ignore it, so that feels like a total trap mechanic. Well, I mean, so let's take armor out of the equation. Like, let's say you're not wearing any armor. Recovery, separate from armor, is a thing to help pace combat. Like, if everything just happens back to back super, super fast, the pacing of the game would be real hard to deal with. Like, if you could just chain stuff as soon as one animation finishes, another goes out. In addition to the player having a difficult time to manage all the party members, all your enemies would be going back to back really quickly with a lot of stuff. And no, it's not a dumbing down thing. That's a mischaracterization. So the, I'm sorry, where was I? Could you actually scroll back up again? Yeah. Oh, so recovery is it's a pacing thing. The armor is there for there to be trade-offs between light and heavy armor. I guess it depends on what your goal is. Like, if you want heavier armor to strictly be better, then there doesn't need to be an additional trade-off for wearing heavy armor. It's just better, and there are, you just say that only certain classes can wear them, or it's a reward for certain types of characters, and they're just better. If there's supposed to be some sort of a trade-off between having a better defensive capability or being faster, or it can be something else. It doesn't have to be recovery. Recovery, because it's related to time and action, that seems to be one of the most straightforward ways to have there be a trade-off for heavy versus light armor. I can't speak to how it's implemented in Tyranny, but that was the idea behind Pillars. Do you see any possibility of companions from PoE 1 reappearing in PoE 2, either as wizened NPCs or actual party companions? That's one of my favorite things about sequels. Yeah, I mean, I think that could happen. It depends on it depends on the timeline of future games. It depends on, what the theme of the game is and what the central conflict is. But yeah, that could certainly happen. It's not like I have any objection for older companions coming back, and I think that people like to see those people if it makes sense. What about loading times? Are they going to be terrible in PoE 2 again? I think there are a lot of things that we recognized in the engine. I think I answered this last time, but I'll answer it again because it's a big concern for a lot of people. I think that we know of a lot of things that can make loading faster. So in the future, we should be able to speed it up quite a bit. Will cities and towns in Pillars 2 be more crowded and populated? I know it's a Unity. I don't know if it's a Unity limitation. So the question is, if Pillars 2 cities will be more populated, and the idea is that it's a Unity limitation. I think it's more of a performance limitation. Unity is part of performance, but there are other things that are part of performance. It's how expensive is our AI, which we have control over to a certain extent. How detailed are the characters in the scene? How many animations are loaded on them? There's a lot of stuff that goes into it. So yeah, Unity is part of that equation, but that's not all of it. I think we can. I think our interest is less in seeing how many NPCs we can put in a scene and how we can make characters feel like they're more involved in the scene, if that makes sense. So I think having characters that have schedules and behaviors, I think from my perspective is a little more important than seeing how many we can put in a scene. That said, obviously we don't want areas in the game to feel barren, but I think even a smaller number of or a comparable number of characters that are engaged in their sort of daily lives and schedules will feel more alive than just having more people in there doing less, or less, if that makes sense.
I've got this. It's done.
Welcome.
That was good.
Can you scroll up a little bit? Is Durance perma-deleted from the setting because Avalon is angry at Obsidian? No. Why would he be? Like, he's a character in the world. I mean, in certain endings, Durance, Durance, well, I don't want to spoil anything, but there are certain endings where he could continue being around and certain endings where he wouldn't. So it would depend on, what the story was and if it made sense. Probably scroll down. Yeah.
Welcome.
What IP would I most? And by the way, I might actually wind up missing some of these questions because a lot of them go by quickly. Ignoring ownership issues, what IP would you most like to work on? Geez, I don't know. I guess I've been thinking about working on a historical game for so long that I haven't really thought about working on other IPs. I do think Dune is really cool. I was bummed that I didn't really get a chance to finish working on an Aliens game. I really like the Aliens franchise. Yeah, I'm sorry. There's just not a lot of IPs lately that I've really been thinking like, man, I really, really want to work on that.
Let's see this stubborn bastard. Let's see this stubborn.
How much am I involved with the thing Tim and Leonard are working on? I'm the design director of the studio, so I look at their docs and I give feedback on their documents. And I talk to them about stuff, but it's not like I'm not on their project or anything like that. So I'm just a guy who gives advice that they can take or leave, depending on how relevant it is for what they're doing.
I'm on the trail.
Why don't we see elevation and terrain in general employed more in tactics games such as this? Unworthwhile layer of complexity. I think that elevation can be worthwhile. However, elevation is a hard thing to convey in an isometric perspective when you can't rotate the camera. I'm not saying it's impossible, so don't get me wrong. It's a hard thing to convey because it's isometric, so everything is flattened. And it can be, you can run into weird situations where characters are standing at heights. It's just, it's weird. You get a lot of optical illusions and things like that, so it can be difficult to understand. I do think, though, in a game like, Final Fantasy Tactics, where you can actually rotate things, I mean, that solves the problem right there. Tactics does a really good job at it. There are a number of games that do a really good job at it. If you can give the player the perspective to really see those height differences, and they're very discrete, that's the other thing that's very good in Tactics, is that there are very discrete height differences. I'm saying, did I say Final Fantasy Tactics, or did I say Tactics? Yep. Okay, cool. Yeah, it can be a lot clearer for people. And in Pillars, though, it's with this perspective and not rotating, it's hard. That's why. Would you have the players start over from level 1 or continue from where they left off in PoE 1? That would depend on, for a sequel, would we have the players start over from level 1 or continue from where they left off in PoE 1? I think it would depend on the story. I think it would depend on the scope of system changes that we made, and also on where we saw the potential for growth over the course of the game. So it depends. You said something about afflictions not being tutorialized properly. Have you considered reorganizing the affliction system entirely? There's sort of a perceivable logic hierarchy to it, but it's a bit random. You could have spells that address some tiers of afflictions, but not others, etc. Yes. So tutorials, I think, could be grouped together more clearly. Yeah, I mean, yes, like there is a sort of hierarchy there. We don't state it very clearly. It's also not explicitly like they're not connected to each other. So making those connections more explicit, and then teaching the player about them and how to counter them, I think we've talked about that actually at length. I think that's one of the, I guess there are 32 different afflictions in Pillars, which is really a lot to keep track of. So yeah, we could do a lot better on that. Follow up to the gameplay mechanics in PoE 2 question earlier. The fundamentals will stay the same and you're not suddenly introducing cooldown abilities or other such nonsense. No, I don't think that cooldowns are a thing that, we did fine without them in Pillars 1. I thought we did fine without cooldowns. So I wouldn't really want to introduce cooldowns for Pillars 2.
Right.
There was recently a Kickstarter backer survey sent out. Imagine you'd be a backer of PoE 2 yourself. What would you like to see different from the first PoE Kickstarter? I know you like patches. You know, to be honest, I never really go for the physical stuff. Or I'm sorry, I shouldn't say never. That's an exaggeration. I'm not really big on physical rewards. I like patches. Sometimes I like stickers. I don't like a lot of big stuff. I collect a lot of crap as it is. So I collect a lot of stuff as it is, and so I don't need a whole lot of other stuff around taking up space. So generally speaking, I don't, those sort of like collector's editions, I don't buy collector's editions of things, even at retail. So I'm glad that other people like them, and I hope that they liked our collector's edition for Pillars. But it's not something that personally appeals to me. Going to try and make combat take less time in Pillars 2. It's a lot faster in Tyranny. Do you mean individual combats? I think that part of the reason why individual combats take less time in Tyranny is because of the party size. That helps. Because the party size also limits the number of combatants in total. So I think that is a big part of it. So I guess it depends. Do you mean the overall lengths of combat might be, I think for a future game could be similar. But yeah, I do think party size plays a big part in that.
God's keeping.
The other missionaries say you have been neglected. They speak out of concern for you.
There's afflictions where the only difference is the strength terrified. Yeah, I mean, like in general, I just think grouping afflictions better. Like we should just group afflictions better.
Have inspired those around you.
Oh, I mean the amount of time spent overall. I had tens of hours of combat in PoE, but only a handful in Tyranny. Yeah. So we did try to thin out. We did try to thin out the overall number of fights in Pillars later, which I know, granted, it is later and it is in patches, but we did try to, especially places like Burial Isle, we tried to bring down the number of fights. It is a big game, so there is a lot of fighting going on. There's a big fighting focus, but we do recognize like the filler combats can get really annoying. They're not particularly interesting if the composition of the fights don't change very much. So yeah, I would say, I mean, it depends on overall game length too, but definitely not having as much filler combat is a goal that we've stated. Any game elements or mechanics you felt forced to implement because they're expected from an IE-like game, even if you felt to their game's detriment? Yeah, I mean, Infinitron's right. Like we had fatigue, and we got fatigue. We got rid of Infinity Engine style fatigue. We have it still as an affliction that you can get from being wounded or if you do a scripted interaction. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that we were like, oh, we got to have that because it's an IE thing. Not really. I mean, I've said this before, but I personally like classless games more than class-based games, but it's not like really a strong thing. And I think for a party-based game, like it works pretty well. So, you know, I don't think there's anything really fundamentally where we're like, oh, this is just super bad. I wouldn't, no, real time with pause wasn't forced. Like, there was never any question that this type of game, and by the way, like, I was the first, well, I don't want to say the first, but I was one of the first people to suggest, let's make a Infinity Engine style game. And there was never any question it was going to be real time with pause. So I never tried to fight against that. And while I will say that I like turn-based generally more than real time with pause, I don't dislike real time with pause. Are there any plans to improve combat and counter design in PoE 2? I always give the Shingarm Bridge battle in Icewind Dale 2 as a good example of an interesting fight with additional stakes, and would love to see more stuff like that in the future. Yes, I think encounter design is something that we could do much better. I think thinking more about initial encounter setup, the layout of the area, how we arrange individual combatants and what their capabilities are, those things take time, but if we have fewer combats overall, I believe we can focus more on each individual fight, and we can make those feel more unique. On Icewind Dale 2, we had the benefit of a whole team of people that had worked on Icewind Dale 1. And so there was a lot of stuff that we had kind of learned on that project, and we were able to apply. And I hope we can do the same with Pillars in the future. How am I going to convince Fergus to let you do a turn-based historical game? He's very much against turn-based. I said, I want to do a historical game, and I want it to be turn-based. And he was like, okay. So, yeah.
Farewell.
Yeah, I like that we were able to do the Kraken. Yeah, I think I like dragons. But I do like to also balance those with not dragons. So yeah, the Kraken at the end of White March we had a lot of fun with that. It was my goal for a long time. I like having big squids in games, big squids and squid-like creatures. So having the Kraken in the game was something I was very happy about.
Oh, I just did it again.
What'd you do?
I got rid of my mechanic person. So Kana was my mechanic skill guy.
Oh, okay.
I was like, oh, cool, I'll put Palgene in. I was like, oh, well, I guess I'll make Sagani my mechanics person. I just got Haravius, and I got rid of Sagani, so I got to do it all over again. I was like, why am I doing this?
Currently, Pillars has 2 sub-races for elves. Is there any chance of introducing Drow, or do they just not exist in the current lore setting? Obviously, pale elves aren't Drow, but they're supposed to be like the weirdo elves. That's really the role that pale elves are supposed to fit. Dark elves or Drow are not really a part of this setting, at least not so far. In the Endless Paths, we learned that Aora might have some sort of Underdark. If Pillars 2 is inspired by BG2, maybe we get to pay a visit. Well, I don't know if it's necessarily true that we imply there's an Underdark. I mean, without having everything that we say in there memorized. The excavation that's done in the Endless Paths is a result of Adnua, sort of building out that space for the statue or the sculpture of his, what was going to be his son's body. And there also is obviously the network of Adra that, passes through Aora. So yeah, I just wanted to clarify that. God likes going to PoE 2 thoughts. They feel like a pretty shoehorned race in Pillars of Eternity, just to have an equivalency to D&D Uber races. They're really to have an equivalent to Ganassi, and Ganassi are arguably powerful. Not all Ganassi are that powerful, and I think certain godlike in Pillars are powerful and others aren't that powerful. They're really there to be, Ganassi likes. It's not really for them to be super powerful, although some of them did wind up feeling that way. They're part of the setting though, so I don't think we would take them out or anything.
I didn't know it was pronounced that way. I always said Agenasi.
I don't know. Actually, I'm not sure. I've always said Ganassi. I don't remember. I'm sure that in the Forgotten Realms guidebook there is a pronunciation guide. The Vithrak tunnels. Oh yeah, that stuff. I'm sorry if I misunderstood you. Yeah, stuff like the Vithrak tunnels. there is stuff like that, and they do live underground. I think that people liked it in White March 2 when we went back to Vithrak. I think everyone, I won't say everyone, but we like them on the team, so we would like to have more Vithrak adventures. What's at the center of Aora? Where do the pillars go? It's a good question. I'm not going to answer it. In case you missed it, the classic 6-character party is still the size you're going for in PoE 2, or is that subject to change? I think, personally, that 4 is probably too few for the style of game. I do think that 5 could be a very nice party size. I think that basically 5 or 6, I think, are both party sizes that could work very well for a game like this. Will Pallegina receive the power of flight from Helium, Pillars 2, and fly off into the sunset? Probably not.
I just want to find her.
Was the Codex interview at Gamescom fun? Oh yeah, that was a really long interview, and actually that was pretty cool. I got really I think I got really tired at the end of it because I gave a talk and then I had an interview for like an hour afterwards, so my voice was pretty much gone at the end of it. What about mod tools? Even is simple item or spell creation with scripting? Well, there are a couple things there. I think there are a few things regarding mods. One is file formats that are easier for people to modify. That's separate from tools. Just making the files easier to mess with, I think, is one thing, and I think in some ways that's easier. Well, no, not in some ways. That's just easier. In terms of tools, that's a bit more complicated. I think that's also possible, but it is more expensive. It requires a lot more testing and things like that. Why can't dragons have some more developed personalities instead of just being big boss fights? Dragon's Dogma's Grigori comes to mind as a great dragon personality. Well, I mean, they do have personalities. I guess you can always say they could be better, but we do try to make each of those dragons have their own motivations and personalities. The Alpine Dragon versus the Sky Dragon versus the Otter Dragon. Yeah. Toward the end of the game, part of the script seems muddled. For example, Aleph panics at the Delim gods, suggesting the gods aren't real, but all the Delim god really do is reference Avara's heresy. Is that a case of different drafts of the scripts clashing? That would be probably a better question for Carrie or Eric. I'm sorry, I don't know in that case. Would you ever consider having limited magical ammunition for a ranged weapon? Admittedly, this doesn't seem like many people miss this, even Grogs. We did consider it, and we decided not to. And actually, at the time, in Pillars 1, like Bobby Null is a really big, like, just core D&D fan. Like, he loves just D&D as it is. And he's a big fan of magical ammunition. And I actually thought there would be more of a negative reaction to us not having magical ammunition, but we went forward with not having it, and it seemed okay. Like, I mean, some people obviously missed it, but I do think that there's a layer of interface and stuff that would be required for special magic ammunition that I think could be hard. There might be other ways to do it interface-wise, or maybe it's a property of a weapon where they can do special limited use attacks or something. Yeah, I don't think it's a high priority because I think compared to a lot of other stuff, I haven't seen a lot of people really saying like, oh man, ammunition I really miss having ammunition. There are some people that do, but I don't think it's been a big pressing thing. Could Eric Fenstermaker still be a lead writer on Pillars as a freelancer? I think anyone being a lead as a freelancer on any project could be really hard. Yeah, especially on a large project, that would be very difficult. Like we've talked to Eric about writing in the future, but it would be pretty hard to be a lead. And I know there are places that do it with remote leads and stuff like that. That would be pretty hard, though. Will there be any changes to inventory management in Pillars 2, or are you happy with the system in Pillars? I think there are ways that we could make that interface a little cleaner, especially interacting between the stash and the individual party inventories. I am not really, to the extent that individual character inventory, like the size of the individual character inventories, and how much people actually use the individual character inventories versus the stash, I think there are ways that we could make that interface work better. I think it worked pretty well, but I still think like going from the slots on the sort of the character inventory page to the stash could be a little clumsy at times. So I do think we can improve that. A lot of people have asked for separate neck and cloak slots. I think we could do that. It's a bunch more items. I know people are obsessed with cloaks, though, so I think we could do something like that. Otherwise, I think it worked pretty well for the most part.
All right. I guess we have one more question before we end our segment here, guys.
Infinitron, I've answered 100,000 of your questions, so I'm not going to answer one of your questions next. It'll be someone else's. Unless no one else asks a question, and then I'm going to have to answer yet another one of Infinitron's questions.
Or we can move on to some awesome fan art. So guys, we love getting fan art from you guys. Please, if you know anyone or you have fan art yourself, please tweet it to us. We show them here on the stream. And as you can see on our beautiful wall of fan art, if your art truly amazes us, we will have your art printed out and put it onto our wall of beautifulness. So please spread the word, guys. So we're coming up on 3 minutes left, guys. So here you go. Here's one question.
Why did you nerf the cool cloak that reflects damage? I don't remember how we nerfed it. I think it was actually buggy.
It was really buggy.
Yeah, I don't know if it was so much that we nerfed it as much as I'm sorry, I don't remember the specifics of that. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I don't remember the specifics either.
Yeah, but I think the main issue was that it was actually bugging out and was not working properly. And then we fixed it in the process. It might have been an unintentional nerf, or rather like fixing it made it work the way it was supposed to, and that appeared to be a nerf.
Also, for your convenience, I have put all these artists' Twitter handle. Again, these are self-portraits of their own character watcher. So this is their watcher and how they envision them in their self-portraits. So it's truly awesome, guys. If you enjoy their work, please follow them.
Also, apologize for my pseudo mustache. This is like a week and a half, and unfortunately, because I'm an elder now, this is all gray and this is dark. So yeah, it looks kind of cheesy. Unfortunate facial hair.
All right, 2 more minutes, guys. 2 more minutes.
Why is the black and white cat the cutest cat? Because it's my cat. It's my cat, Sesame.
There's nothing to apologize for. You look great. Thank you, Tari.
Thanks.
Tari's the best.
It'll look a little better when it fills in more.
And while I have you guys here for another minute, you may notice we have a subscription button, and people in chat have a special Obsidian O next to their name. You will get that if you subscribe to the channel. And what do we do with the money that you subscribe with? Well, all that money goes to Extra Life. It's a charity that helps support children's hospitals around the world, the states, and we are sponsoring the Children's Hospital of Orange County. So all donations, all subscriptions, all that money goes directly to them. We don't keep any of it. And you get all these awesome emojis in chat that you can throw up. You could even throw it in other people's channels. It's super awesome. So thank you guys for joining us. We had an awesome time. We will be doing this again in the new year. So stick around for that. Well, not for stick around for that, but tonight is Obsidian Plays, where myself and our PR manager, Mikey Dowling, will play Overwatch with you guys in chat. So if you want to play Overwatch with us at 7 p.m. tonight in 2 hours, come on back. So thank you very much, guys. We had an awesome time, and we'll see you next time.
See ya.